How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this week's Q&A. So like any other week, if you want a chance to one of your questions being featured in a future video, make sure you do drop a comment down below with your question, and I'll either answer it in a future video or in the comment section directly, or I'll make a individual video for that comment on that subject if needed. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the first question of the week. And it is there a service interval for valve stem seals? And no, not particularly. I wouldn't go in there just to change the valve seals per se at X mileage, unless if you had some sort of reason to go in there. For example, if you were replacing a head gasket or a bent valve due to some catastrophic damage, or whatever, maybe you're replacing some rings for your pistons or anything of that nature, and the car had an extent amount of mileage, at that point, a full rebuild would warrant for a job like that. Also, if you're doing a head gasket, for instance, and you have the head off already on a vehicle with like 150K, at that point, it would probably be a good idea. Although I would not go in there specifically just to change the valve seals at X miles, because typically they don't normally go bad. They could, especially if the engine is mistreated, although in most cases there won't be a need to do such a thing. So hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, so this is a kind of a two-part question. So at 100K, what should you be looking for on your suspension, and should you change your suspension items together? So at 100K, I'd probably be looking at all your bushings, your tie rod ends, ball joints, etc., stuff like that. Any point where there is a bushing, specifically for sure look there. Lower ball joints are a big thing in Hondas. They were more problematic in the 90s and the early 2000s. Now it seems like Honda's ball joints quality have increased dramatically, which is a good thing. So, but still, it's always a good thing to check at every service interval, but especially once the car racks up some mileage, or if you're constantly hitting some potholes, then at that point you should probably be checking those pretty often. You should also check your struts, and at that point, if any of these suspension items are worn, I would absolutely change both in a set. So if one strut is leaking, I would do both struts at this point, because if one is leaking, that means the other one's out the door as well. Unless if one of the struts went bad at, like, let's say 30,000 miles, A, it should probably be covered on your warranty, and B, chances are is either defective from factory or you hit some substantial pothole that caused the damage, and the other one is probably okay. Now again, anything above 100,000 or even like 80,000 or so, you got to kind of play it by ear. But if you're changing any suspension item, I will do everything in a set, kind of like doing brake pads, or you're changing your shoes or whatever. You get two at once. You never get just the one side, in my opinion. So hopefully that answers the question for you. So the next question is OEM versus Aisin, NGK, Denso, Akebono, Bosch, etc. So obviously we know that Honda doesn't actually manufacture most of their parts. They outsource to companies like the ones I just mentioned. So is there a difference? And most cases there is, even though that company makes similar pads without the Honda branding on it. A lot of times the compounds, the rubber, the components used for it, the castings are inferior. Sometimes that may not be the case, but they are better quality versus using something that is not OEM made specific for Honda. So if you were to do aftermarket, I would definitely choose something as close to Honda as possible, like Denso, NGK, Akebono, etc., like that. Somebody that actually manufactures those parts for Hondas, and they're going to be as close as Honda as possible. Again, those companies will make the parts for Hondas, but Honda sometimes specifically has certain requirements of that actual part. And although it's labeled and manufactured by the same company, it may not be the same exact specifications or quality that Honda would want on their specific product. So hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, so the next question is, are there any issues with the 2.0 hybrid engines found in the Accords and the CR-Vs? Now, that engine should also be coming in a new Civic hybrid, so we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. But I'm pretty sure that's basically confirmed at this point. But anyways, in the earlier models of the previous generations, I had some issues with the electric water pump, so not a big deal. I changed a couple of them. We've done 2 head gaskets on those, and there's reports of increased numbers on those at this time. So that's something I'm going to have to monitor and notify you guys if there's definitely an uptick on my end in that case. With the new generation of 23 CRVs and Accords, there are some issues with some injectors leaking. We've seen that. So I've had, I think, 3 or 4 cases. And there's also some reports of some cracked pistons. Not a lot of numbers, but definitely some cases out there. So I'm actually going to be doing a 1-year review on the 23 Accords, both the 1.5T and a hybrid. I'll kind of combine both of those into one video, and that'll be released probably this week or next week, and I'll talk about those issues there as well. So but typically they are good engines. You know, obviously as they increase in numbers and volume, we should see an uptick in issues with them. Hopefully not too many issues, although once again, if anything comes up and arises, I will definitely make sure that you guys are notified. So hopefully that answers the question for you. So the next question is, should you switch to high mileage oil at X miles? So yes, you could do that if you wanted to. Personally, I think it's more beneficial to use the OEM requirements. Make sure you're using those regardless if you're using high mileage oils or not. So OEM specific, it doesn't have to be Honda. Just make sure it's specific to what the manufacturer requires for that vehicle. I think it's more important to change the oil between 3,000 to 5,000 miles from the beginning. And chances are, if you do that, you're not going to have issues down the road with stretch timing components, with burning oil, sticking rings, anything of that nature. And I do think that will be the best term solution. Now, you could switch to those high mileage oil formulas, and I don't really have a problem with that. But again, I think if you practice good habits from the beginning, that'll be a lot more beneficial than you having to switch oils later down the road. So hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, last but not least, question of the week is, should you be undercoating your vehicle if you're in a rust-prone area? So some people say that undercoating actually traps the moisture and the salt in there and accelerates the process of the rusting. Other people like doing it. We personally, we undercoat both our snow plows on a yearly basis. We undercoated before and then sometimes midway through, depending on how much snow we're getting after a thorough wash. I think it's more important, honestly, to be washing your vehicles down with some underbody wash, whether it be at a car wash. Some people actually recommended using one of those sprinkler systems that swings back and forth, and that works great as well. Obviously, if it's extremely cold outside, that's not going to work too well for you. So it really depends on where you are and how cold it actually gets and how much snow and salting is required throughout your season there. So here where I am, we get a couple snow events a year, typically a couple of inches, nothing major, and we don't really get exposed to too much salt. Although once again, in my opinion, when I go and after one of these snow events, I take it to the car wash with the underbody sprayer and make sure they get in there nice and good. And in the summertime, I'll take the power wash to the vehicle. I'll put on some jack stands and just wash it thoroughly, just to make sure that nothing is caught in there long term. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. I'm for it, but again, if the damage is already done, then at that point it's probably too late and nothing you could do. Now, we know Hondas are typically good against rust. Now, in the 90s and the 80s, they had some quarter panel rust issues. Now we've seen the issues with the Ridgelines and the CRVs, although for the most part, they are pretty good and hold up to rust considerably well. And the OEM rusting that they provide is pretty good in my opinion. So hopefully that answers the question for you, and I'll catch everyone on the next one.